Welcome back to Her True Stories, where we share real tales of women who refuse to be victims. I'm about to tell you a story that will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even change how you think about family loyalty. This is the story of Marvi Harlow, a 58-year-old widow who discovered that sometimes the people closest to you can be the most dangerous. Before we dive in, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss the stories we share on this channel. And if you've been following our journey, you know exactly why you're here. Today's story has everything: betrayal, poison, family greed, and a woman who proved that being underestimated can be the most powerful weapon of all. So grab your coffee and maybe check who made it, because this story will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, money, and family. Let's begin. I thought I knew my children, until the day I saw the way they looked at me in that lawyer's office. My name is Marvi Harlow, and I'm 58 years old. Some say I'm beautiful for my age, blessed with silver hair that catches light like spun moonbeams and eyes the color of storm clouds. But beauty means nothing when your own flesh and blood sees you as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when everything changed. 3 weeks had passed since losing my husband Robert to a sudden heart attack, and I was still moving through life like a ghost. The law offices of Sterling and Associates smelled like leather and old money, fitting, considering what was about to unfold. "Mrs. Harlow," Mr. Sterling began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your husband was very specific about his final wishes regarding his estate." My son Ethan sat to my left, his wife Vanessa beside him in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Across from us, my daughter Claire fidgeted with her purse strap, her artist's fingers stained with paint she'd forgotten to scrub off. The entirety of Robert Harlow's estate, valued at $31 million, is bequeathed to his wife, Marvi Harlow, with full and sole discretionary power over all assets, investments, and properties. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. I watched my children's faces transform in real time. Ethan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin like a trapped animal. Vanessa's perfectly applied smile faltered for just a heartbeat, but I caught it. Claire's eyes widened before narrowing into something I'd never seen from my gentle artist daughter before: cold calculation. "There must be some mistake," Vanessa said with that honeyed voice she used when she wanted something. "Surely Robert intended for the family to share in his success. We talked about this at Christmas, remember? He mentioned wanting to help Ethan with his business ideas." "There's no mistake," Sterling interrupted firmly. "Mr. Harlow revised his will 6 months ago, after his cardiac episode. He was quite clear that his wife was the only person he trusted to manage such substantial wealth responsibly." I felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak. Even facing his own mortality, Robert had protected me. He'd seen something I'd been blind to: the way our children looked at our comfortable life, not with gratitude, but with hungry entitlement. The drive home was excruciating. Ethan insisted on following me. "To make sure you're okay, Mom," but I could see him in my rearview mirror, hands gesticulating wildly as he spoke to Vanessa. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the window with visible irritation. That evening, they descended on my house like locusts. All 3 of them, unannounced but somehow expected, settling into my dining room as if they had every right to be there. "Mom," Ethan began over the pot roast I'd been cooking when they arrived, "we need to discuss Dad's decision." "What's to discuss?" I asked, though my stomach was already knotting with dread. "Well, it's just..." Vanessa leaned forward with manufactured concern. $31 million is an enormous responsibility. I mean, at your age, with everything you're dealing with. At your age. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "What Vanessa means," Ethan said quickly, shooting his wife a warning glance. Is that we want to help? Families should support each other, especially now. Claire nodded enthusiastically, her paint-stained fingers clasped together. Daddy always said we were a team. Think of what we could accomplish together. Ethan could finally start that resort business. I could open my own gallery and Vanessa could. Stop. My voice cut through their excited planning like a blade through silk. Your father left his money to me. That was his choice, made when he was completely sound of mind. I intend to honor his wishes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vanessa's smile became razor-thin. Of course, Mom. We're just concerned about you managing everything alone. There are so many decisions to make, so many people who might try to take advantage. But I wasn't alone. I had Robert's love protecting me even in death, and his unwavering faith in my judgment. What I didn't have anymore, I realized with growing clarity, was the family I thought I'd raised. As they left that night, I heard Vanessa whisper to Ethan by the front door. She'll come around. Old people always do when they realize they're in over their heads. Old people. As if 58 was ancient. As if I hadn't successfully run my own boutique for 15 years. As if I hadn't been managing our household finances and investments alongside Robert for 3 decades. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt something besides grief stirring in my chest. Determination. They thought I was weak because I was widowed. They thought I was foolish because I was grieving. They thought I was vulnerable because I was alone. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Before we continue with this story of betrayal and justice, I want to thank our Her True Stories family. If this opening has you hooked, please hit that like button. It helps other women find these tales of strength and survival. And if you're new here, don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Now, let me tell you how quickly my children showed their true faces. They didn't even wait a week before they started circling like vultures. Thursday morning brought Ethan to my door with coffee from the expensive place downtown and a box of French pastries, my son, who never brought me breakfast in his adult life. He settled into Robert's favorite chair without asking, and I wanted to tell him to move but held my tongue. How are you sleeping, Mom? He asked with the kind of careful concern usually reserved for invalids. The truth was I hadn't slept well since the funeral. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that made me ache. You know, Vanessa and I were talking. He set down his coffee cup with studied casualness. Maybe you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house all alone. We have that beautiful guest suite, remember? You could stay with us while you adjust to everything. Adjust. Another carefully chosen word designed to make me feel fragile and dependent. I'm perfectly comfortable here, Ethan. His jaw tightened, the same tell he'd had since childhood when things didn't go his way. Mom, I'm just trying to look out for you. $31 million makes you a target for every scammer and con artist in the city. You might not even recognize if someone was taking advantage of you. The implications stung like a slap. Robert trusted me enough to leave me everything I wanted to say. Why can't you? Instead, I just smiled and changed the subject. Friday brought Vanessa, armed with expensive flower arrangements and a sympathy card that probably cost more than most people's groceries. She flitted around my kitchen like she owned it, rearranging my spice rack and reorganizing my coffee cups with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this takeover. You know, Marvy, she said, using my first name with false intimacy. Ethan's been so worried about you. And honestly, I am too. This house is so isolated, and if something happened, nothing's going to happen. Of course not. But wouldn't it be nice to have family close by? People who care about you. She paused in her reorganization to fix me with those calculating blue eyes. Ethan has such wonderful business instincts. He could help you invest Robert's money wisely, make sure it grows instead of just sitting there. There it was, the real reason for all this sudden attention. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted access to my money. Robert worked 40 years for that money, I said quietly. Exactly. And he'd wanted to help his family, wouldn't he? I mean, what are you really going to do with $31 million at your age? The question hit me like ice water. What was I going to do with it? I'd been a wife and mother for so long, I'd almost forgotten I was a person with my own dreams and desires. I'll figure it out, I said. Vanessa's smile grew sharp around the edges. I'm sure you will, sweetie. I'm sure you will. The weekend brought Claire, tears streaming down her face as she confessed her financial struggles. Student loans from art school, credit card debt, her struggling career as a painter. I held my youngest child and listened to her sob against my shoulder, my heart breaking for her pain. But even as I comforted her, I noticed how quickly her tears dried when I didn't immediately offer to solve all her problems with a check. Daddy always said family comes first, she whispered, and I felt the manipulation like a knife between my ribs. By Monday, they'd established a pattern. Ethan in the mornings with coffee and investment opportunities. Vanessa in the afternoons with helpful suggestions about financial advisors and estate planning. Claire in the evenings with emotional appeals disguised as family bonding. They were tag-teaming me like professional wrestlers, each wearing me down for the next person's attack. There's this financial advisor I know, Vanessa mentioned casually over tea Tuesday afternoon. Very exclusive clientele. He specializes in helping widows manage large estates. She slid a business card across my coffee table. Derek Pemberton, Senior Investment Advisor. The card was expensively embossed, professionally designed. When I looked up, Vanessa was watching me with hawk-like intensity. I'm not ready for that yet, I said carefully. Of course not. But when you are ready. Derek has years of experience with estate planning for senior clients. He could help you set up trusts, maybe restructure some assets for tax efficiency. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Senior clients. As if being 58 made me senile. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert's death. I called my old friend Margaret Chen, who'd been Robert's secretary for 20 years before retiring. Margaret had always been sharp, always been honest, and she'd known our family since the children were small. Marvy, honey, how are you holding up? Her voice was warm and familiar through the phone. I found myself crying, not the careful, controlled tears I'd been holding back around my children, but honest, ugly sobs. I told her everything. The inheritance, the sudden attention from Ethan and Vanessa and Claire, the feeling that I was being hunted by my own family. Margaret listened without interruption, then said quietly, You know what your Robert used to tell me about people and money? What? He said you never really know someone until you see how they act when there's a fortune at stake. Money doesn't change people, Marvy. It just reveals who they really were all along. The words hit me like cold truth. Margaret was right. The inheritance hadn't made my children greedy. It had simply exposed the greed that was already there. What should I do? I whispered. Be smarter than they think you are, she said firmly. And document everything. Every conversation. Every suggestion. Every attempt to pressure you. If this goes where I think it's going, you'll need evidence. That night, I started a journal. A leather-bound notebook that I kept hidden in my bedroom safe, behind Robert's old watch and my grandmother's jewelry. Every manipulation attempt, every suspicious suggestion, every moment that made my instincts scream warnings, all of it went into that book. If my children thought I was just a grieving widow, too old and too trusting to see their schemes, they were about to learn how wrong they were. But first, I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go to get my money. Something told me I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. If they thought I was too old to see what they were doing, they didn't know me at all. Wednesday morning brought Ethan to my door with a leather tube under his arm and excitement radiating from every pore. He spread blueprints across my dining room table with the confidence of a man who'd already won some victory. I didn't know we were fighting. "What are these?" I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. "Remember that business opportunity one mentioned? The luxury eco-resort in Costa Rica?" His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "I've found the perfect location, Mom. Beachfront property, sustainable design, targeting high-end ecotourists. This could be huge." I studied the detailed architectural drawings. They were professional, expensive-looking, complete with landscaping plans and interior design concepts. This wasn't some weekend brainstorming session. This had been planned for months. "How much?" I asked quietly. $8 million for the initial investment. "But Mom, the projected returns are incredible. Conservative estimates show we could triple that within 5 years, possibly more with the right marketing." $8 million. More than a quarter of my entire inheritance for a business my son had never mentioned before his father's death. "Where did you get these blueprints, Ethan?" He shifted slightly, a childhood tell I recognized immediately. "I've been working on this concept for a while. I wanted to have everything ready when the right opportunity came along." When the right opportunity came along. When his father died and left money to someone Ethan thought he could manipulate. "I need time to think about it," I said. His face darkened. "Mom, opportunities like this don't wait around. The sellers are only giving us a 2-week window before they move to other investors. Then I guess we'll have to let it pass." For a moment, I saw something raw and ugly flash across my son's face, something that looked like hatred. Then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'd hate for you to miss out on something Dad would have been so excited about." Using Robert's memory as leverage. That's when I knew I was dealing with a stranger wearing my son's face. After Ethan left, I did something that would have seemed paranoid to the old me. I called the development company listed on his business cards. The woman who answered spoke perfect English and seemed genuinely confused by my inquiry. "I'm sorry, Senora, but we have no properties available at that price point. Perhaps you have confused us with another company." I described the blueprints, the beachfront location, the timeline Ethan had mentioned. There was a long pause.
"Ah, yes.
A Mr. Harlow contacted us several months ago about theoretical development opportunities. But Senora, the land he described is protected government reserve. No private development has been permitted there for over 20 years. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. Ethan had been planning this con for months, possibly even before Robert's death. The professional blueprints, the detailed business plan, the artificial urgency, all of it was an elaborate lie designed to steal $8 million from me. I immediately called Margaret Chen. "How did you know to check?" she asked after I'd told her everything. "Because I'm not the fool they think I am," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "And because Robert didn't raise an idiot." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to see what other surprises they have planned." That afternoon brought Vanessa with her financial advisor, Derek Pemberton, a slick man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement for white-collar crime. He settled into my living room like he belonged there, drinking my coffee and explaining how I could optimize my legacy through strategic asset management. "Mrs. Harlow," he said with practiced sincerity, "at this stage of life, liquidity and security are paramount. You want your wealth working efficiently while protecting your principal." Everything he suggested involved transferring significant assets to accounts he would personally manage. When I asked about his credentials, he handed me an impressive-looking certificate from an organization I'd never heard of. "My compensation is entirely performance-based," he assured me. "I only profit when you profit." I nodded and smiled and asked all the right questions. Then, after they left, I called Marcus Rodriguez, the financial advisor Robert and I had used for the past 15 years. Derek Pemberton? Marcus repeated after I gave him the name. Never heard of him in professional circles. What's his firm? I read him the information from Derek's business card. Marcus put me on hold, and when he returned, his voice was grim. Marvy, that's not a registered investment firm. The address on his card is a UPS store mailbox. This man has no license to handle investments in our state, or any state for that matter. Another elaborate lie. Another sophisticated con. My children weren't just pressuring me to share my inheritance. They were actively trying to steal it through fraud. That evening, Claire called in tears. Mom, I'm so embarrassed to ask, but my rent is due tomorrow, and I'm $300 short. My latest commission fell through, and could you possibly help me out? Just this once. $300. Such a small amount compared to the millions Ethan and Vanessa were attempting to steal. It would have been so easy to say yes, to transfer the money without thinking twice. But I found myself hesitating. Claire, honey, how much is your rent? $1,800 a month. For what kind of place? It's actually a studio, but it's in the arts district. Very inspiring environment for my work. $1,800 for a studio apartment. More than many families paid for 3-bedroom houses. My daughter was living far beyond her means, probably expecting her father's death to solve her financial irresponsibility. I'll think about it, I said. Think about it? Her voice rose to a pitch I hadn't heard since she was a teenager having a tantrum. Mom, I could be evicted. This is $300. You have $31 million. Then maybe you should consider finding a place you can actually afford. The silence that followed felt arctic. When she spoke again, her voice was cold and flat. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Dad would be ashamed of what you've become. She hung up on me. My baby girl, whom I'd nursed through every childhood illness and supported through every artistic dream, hung up on me because I wouldn't instantly solve her financial problems with my money. I sat in Robert's chair and allowed myself to cry, not for my children, but for the illusions I'd been clinging to about who they really were. Then I opened my journal and documented everything. The fake resort development, the unlicensed financial advisor, Claire's entitled demands, and emotional manipulation when I refused to enable her poor choices. My children thought I was weak, thought I was old, thought I was an easy target for their schemes. They were about to learn that the woman who'd built a successful business from nothing, who'd managed household finances for 3 decades, who'd survived the devastating loss of her beloved husband, was nobody's victim. But first, I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. Something in my gut told me I was about to find out. The moment I smelled that coffee, I knew this was no kindness. It was a beautiful Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the will reading. I was in my garden, tending to the roses Robert had planted for our 20th anniversary, when I heard Vanessa's car crunching up my gravel driveway. Her silver BMW gleamed in the morning sun like a predator's smile. She emerged carrying a bakery box and wearing that expression I'd grown to dread. Too bright, too eager, too calculated. Today felt different somehow. There was an energy about her, a nervous excitement that made my instincts scream warnings. Marvy, she called out, as if we were the dearest of friends. I brought pastries from that French bakery you love. I thought we could have a proper coffee morning, just the two of us. Just the two of us. No Ethan to witness whatever she had planned. No Claire to accidentally interfere. Just me and the woman who'd been pressuring me to sign over millions of dollars to her husband. How thoughtful, I said, stripping off my gardening gloves. I'd learned to play along, to let them think their manipulations were working. Inside my kitchen, Vanessa moved with practiced familiarity, opening cabinets and pulling out supplies like she lived here. She'd done this before, gradually establishing her presence in my space, learning my routines, studying my habits. Sit, she insisted, guiding me to my own breakfast nook. Let me take care of everything today. I watched her work with growing unease. Everything was too precise, too rehearsed. She pulled ingredients from her oversized purse, real vanilla extract from Madagascar. She explained, heavy cream in a small container, even a special coffee blend she'd brought just for me. I'm making you something extra special today, she said, working with her back turned. My signature vanilla latte. I've been perfecting the recipe for months. Months. The words sent ice through my veins. How long had she been planning whatever this was? When she turned around, she was holding two identical white mugs, both filled with creamy, aromatic coffee topped with perfect foam hearts. But something in her eyes made my breath catch, anticipation mixed with fear, like someone about to jump off a very high cliff. Here you go, she said, setting one mug directly in front of me. Drink up while it's nice and hot. I lifted the mug toward my lips and caught it, that smell. Sweet but bitter, like almonds but wrong somehow. Faint but unmistakable to someone who'd once worked in a hospital pharmacy. Cyanide. My hands began to shake, but I forced my face to remain calm. Vanessa was watching me with laser focus, like a scientist observing a crucial experiment. She needed me to drink. She was counting on me to drink. Instead, I set the mug down and smiled. This smells absolutely incredible. You know what? Your mother is visiting this week, isn't she? I should call her down to try this too. Patricia loves discovering new flavors. The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly, I thought she might faint. Oh, no, she's not really a coffee person. Caffeine keeps her up. Nonsense, I said, already reaching for my phone. She was just telling me yesterday how much she misses good coffee since her doctor restricted her diet. This would be perfect for her. Marvy, really, I don't think. But I was already dialing. Patricia? Could you come downstairs, dear? Vanessa's made the most wonderful coffee, and I insist you try some. Within minutes, Patricia appeared in my kitchen, a sweet 70-year-old woman who'd always been kind to me, completely unaware that her daughter had just tried to commit murder. She took the chair beside me, chatting pleasantly about the morning weather. Now, which mug is mine? Patricia asked cheerfully. Before Vanessa could stop me, I reached across and slid my untouched mug toward her mother. This one, dear. Vanessa made it specially. Vanessa's mouth opened in silent horror. She couldn't very well snatch a coffee mug away from her own mother without raising suspicions. I watched her face cycle through panic, desperation, and something that looked like grief. Actually, Mom, Vanessa said quickly, maybe you'd prefer regular coffee? You know how sensitive your stomach is. But Patricia had already lifted the mug to her lips. Oh my, this smells heavenly. Vanilla is my absolute favorite. I kept my eyes locked on Vanessa as Patricia took her first sip, then another, then a longer drink. Delicious, Patricia proclaimed. You've outdone yourself, sweetheart. Vanessa looked like she was about to vomit. She kept checking her watch, fidgeting with her wedding ring, making excuses to step outside for fresh air. But I wasn't about to let her escape. Tell me about this vanilla extract, I said conversationally. Madagascar, you said? How exotic. Where did you find it? It's very special. Very concentrated. Concentrated indeed. Based on my old pharmacy training, I estimated 20 to 30 minutes for the poison to take effect, depending on Patricia's smaller body weight and the dosage Vanessa had calculated for me. 27 minutes later, Patricia began to feel unwell. It started subtly dizziness, then nausea. She excused herself to use the bathroom, and I heard her being violently sick. When she emerged, her face was gray, and she was trembling. I don't feel right, she whispered, gripping the doorframe for support. Vanessa jumped up, all pretend concern.
Mom?
What's wrong? But I was already dialing 911. I need an ambulance immediately, I said with forced calm. I have a 70-year-old woman showing signs of acute poisoning. The word poisoning hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, knocking over her chair with a crash. Poisoning, she repeated. That's impossible. She just has the flu, or maybe something she ate. But Patricia was deteriorating rapidly. Her breathing became labored, her pulse weak and rapid. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was barely conscious. I rode in the ambulance, holding Patricia's hand while the EMTs worked frantically to stabilize her. Through the rear window, I could see Vanessa following in her BMW, probably calling Ethan, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. At the hospital, as Patricia was rushed into emergency treatment, I pulled aside the head nurse, a competent-looking woman who reminded me of my old pharmacy supervisor. I believe she was poisoned, I said quietly. You should test for cyanide. The nurse's eyebrows shot up. What makes you think that? The smell in the coffee, sweet almonds, and the fact that her daughter prepared the drink that made her sick. Within hours, blood tests confirmed what I already knew. Patricia had ingested enough cyanide to kill someone twice her size, but rapid medical intervention had saved her life. She would recover, but it would take weeks. As I sat in the hospital waiting room, watching Vanessa pace and make frantic phone calls, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death.
Power.
They'd underestimated me completely. They thought I was a naive widow, too trusting to recognize poison, too old to fight back effectively. They thought I wouldn't notice fake business proposals or unlicensed financial advisors or the distinctive smell of cyanide in my coffee. Most importantly, they thought I wouldn't be smart enough to turn their own weapon against them. They were wrong about everything. My daughter-in-law had just tried to murder me for money and instead had poisoned her own mother. Now she would face the consequences of that choice. But this was only the beginning. I was done being the victim in the story. From now on, I was writing the ending. If you're shocked as I was in that moment, please let me know in the comments below. The audacity of trying to poison your own mother-in-law for money, it's beyond comprehension. If you're new to her true stories, this is exactly the kind of content we bring you every week. Real women facing unthinkable betrayals and fighting back. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because trust me, Marvy's story is just getting started. Now let me tell you what happened when the truth finally came to light. She didn't even have time to ask what was in it. The hospital waiting room felt like a courtroom where I was the only one who knew the verdict. Vanessa paced in her designer heels, each click against the linoleum more frantic than the last. Every few minutes she'd check her phone, sending what I assumed were desperate texts to Ethan about their mother-in-law's rapidly deteriorating condition, about their failed murder attempt. Dr. Richardson emerged from the intensive care unit at exactly 4:15 p.m. I remember the precise time because I'd been watching the clock, counting the minutes since Patricia had taken that first poison sip meant for me. Mrs. Morrison is stable, he announced, and I watched Vanessa's shoulders sag with what might have been relief if I didn't know better. However, I need to discuss some very concerning test results with the family. Vanessa stepped forward on unsteady legs. I'm her daughter. And you are Vanessa Harlow. Dr. Richardson's expression grew grave. Mrs. Harlow, your mother has been poisoned with hydrogen cyanide. This was a deliberate act, not an accident. We're legally required to contact law enforcement. I watched the blood drain from Vanessa's face so quickly I thought she might collapse. Poisoned? That's impossible. She was just drinking coffee. We all had coffee. Yes, that's what Mrs. Harlow here told us. The doctor nodded toward me. She mentioned that you prepared the beverages. I I made coffee for both of us. We both had the exact same thing. But even as she spoke, we both knew it was a lie. I had switched the mugs, and she knew it. Detective Rosa Martinez arrived 90 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who looked like she'd heard every lie in the book twice. She interviewed each of us separately, starting with me. "Mrs. Harlow," she began, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair, "walk me through this morning's events." I told her everything with careful precision. Vanessa's surprise visit, her insistence on making the coffee herself, the distinctive bitter almond smell, my decision to switch the mugs. Detective Martinez took detailed notes, her eyebrows rising when I mentioned recognizing the scent of cyanide. "You have experience with cyanide, Mrs. Harlow?" "I worked at Memorial Hospital's pharmacy for 2 years in my 20s. We had extensive safety training on various toxins. Hydrogen cyanide has a very distinctive odor, sweet almonds. Once you've been trained to recognize it, you never forget." "And you immediately suspected poisoning?" I suspected something was wrong. Vanessa was acting strangely, nervous, excited, watching me too intently. When I smelled that familiar odor, I met the detective's steady gaze. "I've raised children, detective. I know when someone is lying to me." "Why didn't you call police immediately?" This was the crucial question. I chose my words carefully. I wasn't completely certain, and I thought if I was wrong, I'd seem like a paranoid widow. But if I was right and refused to drink, Vanessa would know I'd discovered her plan. The safest option seemed to be making sure someone else received the coffee, someone who could get immediate medical attention. It was mostly the truth. I didn't mention that part of me had wanted definitive proof of what Vanessa was capable of. Detective Martinez made more notes. "Tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law and the recent inheritance." That's when I shared everything. The $31 million inheritance, the immediate pressure from all 3 children, the fake business proposals, the fraudulent financial advisor. I showed her photos I'd taken of Ethan's fake blueprints and Derek Pemberton's business card. "You've been documenting their behavior?" "I started keeping records when I realized they weren't going to accept their father's final wishes. I never imagined it would escalate to attempted murder." When Detective Martinez interviewed Vanessa, I couldn't hear the conversation through the conference room's glass walls, but I could read body language. Vanessa's animated gestures, her frequent head shaking, the way she kept touching her throat, classic signs of deception. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, Vanessa emerged looking hollow-eyed and defeated. She walked straight to me. "This is all your fault," she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "If you'd just been reasonable about the money, none of this would have happened." "You mean if I'd let you steal from me?" I replied quietly. "Or if I'd just died quietly when you poisoned my coffee?" She stepped back as if I'd struck her. "I don't know what you're talking about. The cyanide solution in your purse, Vanessa. The one you've been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to kill me." I was guessing about the purse, but the look of pure terror that crossed her face confirmed I'd guessed correctly. "You switched the mugs," she whispered. "You knew what I was doing. I'm not the helpless old woman you thought I was." Detective Martinez returned at that moment, approaching Vanessa with handcuffs. "Mrs. Harlow, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As they led Vanessa away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice was being served, but at the cost of destroying what remained of my family. Ethan arrived just as the police car was pulling away. He ran toward me, his face a mask of confusion and panic. "Mom, what's happening?" Vanessa called me, but she wasn't making sense. Something about Patricia being poisoned. I looked at my son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, whose first steps I'd celebrated, whose dreams I'd supported, and saw a stranger. Because the son I'd raised wouldn't have married a woman capable of murder. He wouldn't have been part of elaborate schemes to defraud his own mother. Unless he'd known exactly what his wife was capable of all along. "Your wife tried to poison me today, Ethan," I said simply. "Instead, she nearly killed her own mother." The expression that crossed his face wasn't shock or disbelief. It was calculation, the look of someone rapidly figuring out how to minimize damage to himself. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Vanessa would never. There must be some mistake. The police found cyanide in her purse. She confessed to switching it into my coffee. Patricia is alive only because I gave her the poison cup instead of drinking it myself." Ethan's face went white, not with shock at learning his wife was a would-be murderer, but with the realization that their plan had failed catastrophically. That's when I knew for certain that my son had been complicit in the attempt on my life. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew what she was planning." "Mom, I swear." "Don't." My voice cut through his protests like steel. "Don't lie to me anymore, Ethan. I'm done pretending I don't see what you really are." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The mask of the concerned son slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath.
"Fine," he said.
"You want the truth?" We were desperate. "Do you have any idea what it's like watching you hoard millions of dollars while your own children struggle? While I'm drowning in debt and Claire can barely pay rent. So, you decided to murder me for it. We decided to solve a problem that you created by being selfish and cruel." The words hung between us like a poison gas cloud. My son had just admitted to planning my death, and he was angry at me for surviving it. "Your father was right about you," I said quietly. "He knew exactly what kind of people you'd become if you inherited his money. That's why he left it all to me." Ethan's face twisted with rage. Dad was a controlling bastard who wanted to manipulate us from beyond the grave. "Well, guess what? You're not immortal, Mom. And that money will be ours eventually." The threat was unmistakable. Even with his wife under arrest for attempted murder, Ethan was already planning his next move. I pulled out my phone and showed him that I'd been recording our conversation. "The police will find this very interesting." His face went from red to ashen in seconds. "You can't, that's illegal." "One-party consent state, Ethan. Perfectly legal as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded." I smiled coldly. "I may be 58, but I'm not stupid." He left without another word, but I could see the fear in his eyes. His wife was going to prison, and now he'd implicated himself as an accessory to attempted murder. That night, I sat alone in my house and allowed myself to mourn. Not for Vanessa, who'd tried to kill me, or for Ethan, who'd helped plan my murder. I mourned for the family I'd thought I had, for the children I'd believed I'd raised, for the illusions that had been shattered beyond repair. Then I opened my journal and wrote down everything that had happened. Every word, every threat, every admission of guilt. Because this wasn't over. My children had revealed themselves as people capable of murder for money. Now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. The old Marvy would have tried to forgive them, would have made excuses for their behavior, would have probably given them money to help them start over. But the old Marvy had died the moment she smelled poison in her coffee. The new Marvy was going to make sure they paid for what they'd tried to do. Not just legally, though they would certainly face consequences in court. They were going to pay in ways they couldn't even imagine yet. Because I'd learned something important about myself in that hospital waiting room. I wasn't just a survivor. I was someone you didn't want as an enemy. They didn't know it yet, but I already had them by the throat. The phone call started that evening, barely an hour after Ethan had stormed out of the hospital. First Claire, hysterical and crying about Vanessa's arrest being all over social media. Then extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years, all suddenly concerned about the terrible misunderstanding that had landed poor Vanessa in jail. Each caller had the same underlying message. Surely I was mistaken about the poisoning. Surely there was some innocent explanation. Surely I wouldn't want to destroy the family over what might have been an accident. I listened to them all with growing amazement. Even faced with attempted murder, they were more concerned about protecting the perpetrator than supporting the victim. It's just so hard to believe, my sister-in-law Linda said during her call. Vanessa always seemed like such a sweet girl. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand what happened? Linda, she put cyanide in my coffee. Her mother is in intensive care because she drank poison meant for me. Well, yes, but maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she grabbed the wrong bottle, or... I hung up on her. I was done making excuses for people who'd rather believe comfortable lies than face uncomfortable truths. The first productive call I made was to Marcus Rodriguez, my financial advisor. Marcus, I need you to freeze all accounts where any family members are listed as beneficiaries or have access privileges, I told him. Credit cards, loans, anything where I'm a cosigner or guarantor. Marvy, that's quite drastic. Are you certain? My daughter-in-law just tried to murder me for my inheritance, Marcus. My son was complicit. Yes, I'm certain. Consider it done. I'll have everything locked down by morning. The second call was to Harold Chen, Margaret's husband, who'd been a private investigator before retiring. Harold was 75 but still sharp as a razor, still connected to a network of professionals who could dig up information that wasn't available to the general public. Harold, I need you to investigate my children's finances. Bank records, phone records, internet search histories, if you can get them legally. I want to know exactly what they've been planning and for how long. You sure about this, Marvy? Once you open this door, there's no closing it again. They opened the door when they decided I was expendable. I'm just walking through it. Give me 72 hours. While I waited for Harold's investigation, I focused on documenting everything I could remember. Every suspicious conversation, every pressure tactic, every moment that had made my instincts scream warnings. The journal I'd started was becoming a detailed record of a conspiracy to defraud and murder me. On Friday afternoon, Detective Martinez called with an update. Mrs. Harlow, we've executed search warrants on both your son's and daughter-in-law's residences. I thought you should know what we found. I'm listening. In Mrs. Vanessa Harlow's home office, we discovered extensive research on inheritance law, specifically regarding circumstances that would expedite the transfer of assets to surviving family members. We also found printed emails between her and your son discussing what they called the money problem and various solutions they'd considered. My stomach clenched. Various solutions? The emails date back 6 months, Mrs. Harlow. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision. They'd been planning this for half a year, possibly longer. 6 months ago, Robert had still been alive, recovering from his mild heart attack and revising his will to ensure I'd be protected. While I'd been caring for my husband and worrying about his health, my children had been plotting my death. There's more, Detective Martinez continued. We found the source of the cyanide, photography developing chemicals purchased online over the past 2 months. Small amounts from different suppliers, delivered to various addresses. Very sophisticated planning. What about Ethan's house? Your son had detailed financial records hidden in his home office. Credit card debt, gambling losses, communications with loan sharks. He owes significant money to some very dangerous people. How much? Conservative estimate? $250,000. Maybe more. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. $250,000 in gambling debt. No wonder they'd been so desperate to get their hands on my inheritance. We also found a notebook with calculations related to your inheritance. Timelines for accessing funds immediately versus long-term inheritance schedules.
And she paused.
This is difficult to tell you, but we found draft plans for disposing of a body and covering up a death to make it appear natural.
The phone slipped from my hand.
I had to pick it up off the floor. Mrs. Harlow? Are you there? I'm here, I whispered. You're saying they planned to kill me and hide my body? The evidence suggests they were exploring multiple scenarios. Poisoning to simulate heart failure was apparently their preferred method because it would be less likely to trigger an autopsy. I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just about money anymore. My children had planned my murder with the same care most people put into planning a vacation. Harold called Saturday morning with his preliminary findings. Marvy, you're not going to like what I found, but you need to hear it. Tell me everything. Your daughter, Claire, has been in contact with that fake financial advisor, Derek, for 3 months. They've been planning to have you declared mentally incompetent once they gained access to your accounts. Incompetent? They had a psychiatrist lined up, Dr. Kevin Walsh, who coincidentally lost his license 2 years ago for filing fraudulent competency evaluations. They were going to claim you were suffering from grief-induced dementia. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Not only had they wanted to steal from me, they'd planned to destroy my reputation and autonomy in the process. There's more, Harold continued. Your son's gambling debts are actually closer to $400,000. He's been borrowing against future inheritance expectations, promising creditors they'd be paid when you died. He was gambling with my death as collateral. Gets worse. 3 weeks ago, one of his creditors threatened to kill him if he didn't pay up within 30 days. That's when the timeline for your accident became urgent. I felt like I was drowning in revelations of how little my children had valued my life. What about the Costa Rica resort? Complete fabrication. The blueprints were stolen from a legitimate development project in Florida that was canceled 5 years ago. Your son just changed the headers and location details. Every aspect of their plan was a lie built on lies. They'd created an elaborate fantasy designed to separate me from my money, and when that failed, they'd moved to murder. Harold, I need you to compile all of this into a formal report. Police reports, financial records, everything. Already working on it. But Marvy, what are you planning to do with all this information? That was the question I'd been asking myself since Thursday morning. What did you do when your own children tried to murder you? How did you respond to that level of betrayal? The old Marvy would have tried to understand, would have made excuses, would have probably still tried to help them despite everything. But the old Marvy was gone, poison along with that coffee cup I'd refused to drink. I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again, I said quietly. Legal consequences aren't enough? Legal consequences are just the beginning, Harold. They wanted my money? They're going to discover exactly what it can buy when it's used against them instead of for them. I wasn't just planning to see them convicted. I was planning to ensure they spent the rest of their lives regretting the day they decided their mother was worth more dead than alive. Because I'd learned something important about myself over the past few days. I wasn't just intelligent and resourceful. When properly motivated, I could be absolutely ruthless. And my children had just given me all the motivation I'd ever need. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think Marvy should do next. We're building to something explosive here, and I want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Her True Stories if you haven't already. We bring you these incredible tales of women fighting back every single week. Now, let me tell you about the trap that finally caught them both. The trick to catching a liar is to let them think you believe them. Vanessa made bail Monday morning, $50,000 that Ethan somehow scraped together, probably by selling everything valuable they owned or borrowing against future assets they'd never actually receive. I watched from my car across the street as she emerged from the county jail looking like a ghost. No makeup, unwashed hair, wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in 3 days earlier. Ethan was waiting in his pickup truck, another sign of their deteriorating finances. His BMW had probably been repossessed. They sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour, and I could see the intensity of their conversation through the windshield. From their body language, it wasn't a loving reunion. They drove straight to my house. I was ready for them. Marvy, Vanessa began when I opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. I know how this looks, but I swear to you, what happened to Patricia was an accident. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I let them into my living room, where I'd carefully staged everything. My phone positioned on the coffee table to record without being obvious. Soft lighting to make them feel comfortable. A glass of wine in my hand to appear relaxed and perhaps slightly impaired. "I'm listening," I said gently, settling into my chair like a sympathetic grandmother. Vanessa launched into her story, a masterpiece of manipulation designed to evoke sympathy while admitting to nothing prosecutable. She talked about feeling overwhelmed by financial pressure, about wanting to help Ethan but not knowing how. She portrayed herself as a confused, desperate woman who'd made a terrible mistake. "I brought those different vanilla extracts because I wanted to create something special," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I thought if we could just have a nice, calm conversation about sharing some of the inheritance, if I could show you how much we care about you." "Vanilla extracts?" I asked innocently. "You brought several?" She hesitated for just a moment. Yes. I wanted you to have choices. Madagascar, Tahitian, Mexican vanilla. I thought you could pick your favorite for the coffee." The life flowed smoothly now, creating a story that would explain away any poison residue they'd found in her possession. "That was very thoughtful," I said. "Where are those extracts now?" "The police took everything from my purse," Ethan interjected quickly. "It's harassment, pure and simple. They're treating an accident like some kind of crime." I nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure this will all be cleared up once they test everything properly. Real vanilla extract is perfectly harmless, after all." Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Fear, guilt, the calculation of a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "The thing is," I continued conversationally, swirling my wine, "I've been thinking about what you both said before. About families sticking together, about sharing Dad's wealth more fairly." Both of them leaned forward like wolves catching the scent of prey. "Maybe you were right. Maybe Robert would want his money to help his children directly." I took a sip of wine, letting the silence build their anticipation. 31 million is an enormous responsibility for one person. "It really is," Vanessa said quickly, her desperation barely concealed. "And at your stage of life, not that you're old, of course, but managing that much wealth can be so stressful." "Overwhelming," I agreed. "You know, if something happened to me, if I had another health crisis or an accident or became seriously ill, what would happen to all that money?" Ethan and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance. This was dangerous territory, but they couldn't resist the bait I was offering. "Well," Ethan said carefully, "I suppose it would pass to your children as next of kin, unless you'd specified otherwise in a will." "Do you have a current will?" Vanessa asked with studied casualness, though her eyes were sharp with interest. They were fishing for information about how quickly they could inherit if I died. The question revealed everything about their priorities. "I should probably update it," I mused. "The one I have now is from years ago, before Robert's heart problems." Another lie, but they had no way of knowing my will was current and very specific about asset distribution. "We could help you with that," Vanessa suggested eagerly. "Ethan and I know some excellent estate planning attorneys who specialize in complex inheritances." Of course they did. Probably the same lawyers who'd helped them draft those power of attorney papers to have me declared incompetent. "You're both so thoughtful to offer help." I refilled my wine glass, noting how they tracked every movement. "I have to ask something that's been bothering me, though. That morning when Patricia got sick, what exactly did you put in my coffee, Vanessa?" I know you said vanilla extract, but there was something else, wasn't there? It had such an unusual smell. Vanessa went very still, like a deer sensing a predator. I don't know what you mean. Sweet, but bitter at the same time. Almost like almonds, but not quite right. Maybe the coffee beans were stale? Ethan suggested weakly. I shook my head. No, this was something specific. Something you added to my cup, Vanessa. What was it? The silence stretched between us, like a wire under tension. Vanessa's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them together to hide the tremor. I already told you it was vanilla extract. Which kind? I pressed gently. Madagascar? Tahitian? Mexican? You brought so many different varieties. Surely you remember which one you actually used in my coffee. I mixed them together to create a unique flavor profile. More lies, but she was getting flustered, contradicting her earlier story. My phone continued recording every word. How much did you use? How much what? How much of your special extract blend did you put in my coffee? A few drops? A teaspoon? The whole bottle? Vanessa shot a desperate look at Ethan, who was staring at his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. Just a small amount, she whispered. Only a few drops. A few drops of what, Vanessa? And then, finally, her composure shattered completely. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she sobbed. You were supposed to drink it, not her. You were supposed to just go to sleep peacefully, like you were tired from grief. Ethan grabbed her arm. Vanessa, stop talking right now. But the confession poured out of her like poison from a burst abscess. Do you know what it's like watching you sit on all that money while we lose everything? Do you know what those loan sharks threatened to do to Ethan? To both of us? We were desperate, and you just sat there being selfish, hoarding wealth you'll never even spend. So, you decided to murder me for it. It wasn't supposed to be murder. I researched the dosage carefully. It was supposed to look like a heart attack. Natural causes for a grieving widow. No one would have questioned it. Except you miscalculated. I calculated for your body weight, not Patricia's. She's so much smaller and frilier. Vanessa was crying hysterically now. I never wanted to hurt my mother. I love her. But you wanted to hurt me. I wanted the money. The words exploded out of her with shocking venom. I wanted you gone, so we could finally have what we deserve. You're not even Ethan's real mother. You're just some woman his father married. That inheritance should belong to his biological family. Ethan finally found his voice. Vanessa, shut up. Just shut up right now. But it was too late. She'd confessed to premeditated murder on recording, with clear motive and intent. More importantly, she'd revealed the depth of calculation behind her actions and her complete lack of remorse for attempting to kill me. I stopped the recording on my phone and stood up slowly. Thank you, I said quietly. That's exactly what I needed to hear. They both stared at me in growing horror as reality crashed over them. You recorded us, Ethan whispered. Every word. Vanessa's confession, her admission of premeditation, her motive for wanting me dead. The district attorney is going to find this very compelling evidence. Vanessa lunged for my phone, but I was already backing toward the kitchen where I had a backup recording device hidden. You can't use that, she screamed. That's illegal entrapment. Actually, it's perfectly legal. One-party consent state, which means as long as one person in the conversation knows they're being recorded, and I did, it's admissible in court. Ethan was on his feet now, his face flushed with rage. You manipulative bitch. You set us up. I gave you every opportunity to tell the truth, I said calmly. You chose to dig yourselves deeper instead. They left in a storm of threats and accusations, but I could see the fear beneath their anger. They knew what this recording meant. Vanessa's bail would be revoked. Her sentence would be much harsher now that she'd confessed to premeditated murder. And Ethan had just become an accessory after the fact by trying to help her cover up the crime. I poured myself another glass of wine and called Detective Martinez. Detective? This is Marvy Harlow. I have something you're going to want to hear immediately. As I waited for her to arrive, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. For months, my children had seen me as weak, vulnerable, easy prey for their schemes. Tonight, they'd learned that the woman they'd tried to murder was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. But this was still just the beginning of their education. They thought the police were here for me, but they were here because of me. Detective Martinez arrived within 45 minutes, bringing a colleague from the district attorney's office, a stern-faced prosecutor named Jennifer Walsh who specialized in elder abuse and domestic violence cases. They sat at my kitchen table, listening to the recording with expressions that grew increasingly grim. "This is a prosecutor's dream," Walsh said when the playback finished. "Clear confession, obvious premeditation, detailed motive. Mrs. Harlow, you've just handed us a conviction for first-degree attempted murder." "What about Ethan?" I asked. "He was clearly involved in planning this." Detective Martinez nodded. "At minimum, conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact. Depending on what else we uncover in his communications, possibly more serious charges. We'll be executing additional search warrants tomorrow morning," Walsh added. "Phone records, computer files, bank statements. If there's more evidence of conspiracy, we'll find it." That night, I slept better than I had since Robert's death. Not because the danger was over. I knew my children would continue to be threats as long as they were free, but because I'd finally taken control of the situation. I was no longer reacting to their schemes. I was orchestrating their downfall. At 6:30 a.m., I was drinking coffee in my breakfast nook when my phone rang. Claire's number. "Mom?" Her voice was shaky and frightened. "There are police cars everywhere at Ethan's house. And at Vanessa's apartment, too." "What's happening?" I looked out my front window. 3 blocks away, I could see flashing lights at Ethan's modest ranch house. Men in FBI windbreakers were carrying boxes and computer equipment to waiting vans. "I imagine they're gathering evidence," I said calmly. "Evidence of what?" "Mom, you're scaring me." "You should be scared, Claire. Your brother and his wife tried to murder me. Now they're going to face the consequences." The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. "Then, murder?" "Mom, that's insane. Vanessa would never." "She confessed, Claire. Last night in my living room. She told me exactly how she planned to poison me and make it look like natural causes." Another long pause. When Claire spoke again, her voice was very small. "Oh God. Did she really try to kill you?" "Yes." "And Ethan knew?" "Yes." I could hear her crying softly. "Mom, I swear I didn't know anything about this. I would never have, if I'd known what they were planning." "I hope that's true, Claire. For your sake." The truth was, I believed her. Claire was selfish and entitled, willing to steal from me through legal manipulation, but I didn't think she was capable of murder. She didn't have the cold calculation that Ethan and Vanessa had shown. What's going to happen to them? They're going to prison for a very long time. By noon, both Ethan and Vanessa were back in custody. This time, there would be no bail. Vanessa had violated the terms of her release by contacting me, and her recorded confession made her an extreme flight risk. Ethan was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, and fraud related to the fake business proposals. The local news picked up the story by evening. Channel 7's lead story was Wealthy Widow Survives Elaborate Murder Plot. The reporter, a polished woman with perfect makeup, stood outside my house while she recounted the basic facts. Sources close to the investigation say the attempted murder was motivated by a $31 million inheritance that the victim's late husband left exclusively to her, cutting out their adult children. I watched from behind my curtains, noting how they framed the story. I wasn't described as a woman who'd survived attempted murder by her own family. I was a wealthy widow whose money had supposedly motivated the crime, as if my inheritance somehow made me partially responsible for my children's choices. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting exclusive interviews, distant relatives suddenly concerned about my well-being, neighbors who'd barely spoken to me before calling to offer support. I let them all go to voicemail. The only call I took was from Patricia, calling from her rehabilitation facility. "I saw the news," she said weakly. "They're saying Vanessa confessed to trying to poison you?"
She did.
Everything. The planning, the research, even the calculations she made for the dosage. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I keep wondering what I did wrong as a mother. How did I raise a daughter capable of murder?" "You didn't do anything wrong, Patricia. Evil isn't taught, it's chosen. Vanessa chose money over human life. That's not a reflection of your parenting. Will you testify at the trial?" "Absolutely. I'm going to look her in the eye when they read that guilty verdict." The search warrants yielded even more evidence than Detective Martinez had expected. Hidden in Ethan's home office, investigators found a detailed timeline of my daily routines, noting when I was most likely to be alone and vulnerable. They discovered correspondence with multiple loan sharks, some threatening violence if debts weren't paid immediately. Most damning of all, they found a shared Google document between Ethan and Vanessa titled Project M, their code name for murdering me. The document contained research on undetectable poisons, methods for disposing of bodies, and detailed plans for accessing my bank accounts immediately after my death. The level of premeditation is staggering, Detective Martinez told me during a follow-up interview. They'd been planning your murder for over 6 months, researching every detail. 6 months, I repeated. While I was caring for Robert during his illness, they were planning to kill me for his money. There's more. We found evidence that they'd attempted to take out life insurance policies on you without your knowledge. The applications were rejected because they couldn't provide proper authorization, but it shows how long they'd been planning this. Insurance fraud on top of attempted murder. My children had been more than willing to commit multiple felonies to get their hands on my inheritance. The revelation that hurt most came from Vanessa's computer files. Photos of me taken secretly over months. Pictures of my daily routines, my medical appointments, my grocery shopping trips. I'd been under surveillance by my own family, studied like a target for assassination. But the discovery that shocked me most was a draft obituary they'd written for me. A touching tribute to a beloved mother and widow who died peacefully in her sleep after a brief illness. They'd planned not just my death, but how they'd present it to the world. As I read their fake obituary, full of lies about what a wonderful daughter-in-law Vanessa had been, how much they'd all loved me, I felt the last vestiges of grief for my lost family disappear. These weren't my children anymore. They were strangers who'd worn my children's faces while planning my destruction. "Mrs. Harlow," Walsh said during our final pretrial meeting, "I want you to know that this is one of the most clear-cut cases of attempted murder I've ever prosecuted. The evidence is overwhelming." What kind of sentences are we looking at? For Vanessa, given the premeditation and the confession, I'm seeking life without parole. For Ethan, conspiracy and accessory charges could mean 25 to 40 years. Life without parole. My daughter-in-law would die in prison for trying to kill me. My son would spend the best years of his remaining life behind bars. The old Marvy might have felt sorry for them. The new Marvy felt only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served.
"There's one more thing," Walsh added.
We've received plea bargain requests from both defense teams. They're offering to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for reduced sentences. What do you recommend? Honestly, we don't need their cooperation. The evidence is so strong that I'm confident we'll get convictions on the most serious charges. I'd rather see them face the full consequences of their actions. Then that's what we'll do. As I left the prosecutor's office that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete control over my own destiny. My children had tried to make me a victim, but instead they'd made me into something far more dangerous. They'd made me into their judge, jury, and executioner. The trial would just be a formality. The real judgment had already been passed. It's amazing how fast a marriage crumbles when prison is on the horizon. The trial began on a cold February morning, for months after my near murder. I'd spent those months preparing, not just as a witness, but as a woman reclaiming her power. I hired a personal stylist, updated my wardrobe with sharp, elegant suits, and had my silver hair cut into a sophisticated style that caught courtroom lights like polished steel. If I was going to face my would-be killers in court, I was going to look magnificent doing it. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Jennifer Walsh presented evidence with surgical precision: the recorded confession, the search warrant discoveries, the forensic analysis of the poisoned coffee. The jury watched in silent horror as she played audio of Ethan and Vanessa discussing my murder like a business transaction. But it was the photos from Vanessa's surveillance of me that made several jurors gasp audibly. Images of me gardening, grocery shopping, visiting the bank, completely unaware I was being stalked by my own family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walsh told the jury during opening statements, "this was not a crime of passion. This was not a desperate act by people who lost control. This was a cold, calculated murder conspiracy spanning more than 6 months of planning, surveillance, and preparation. The defendants didn't just want Marvi Harlow's money. They wanted her dead, and they wanted to profit from her murder." The defense tried multiple strategies, all doomed to fail. Vanessa's lawyer attempted to paint her as a victim of Ethan's financial pressure and gambling addiction. Ethan's attorney claimed his client had been manipulated by his wife, that he'd had no real knowledge of her murderous intentions. These strategies might have worked if not for the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The shared Google document titled Project M. The joint research on undetectable poisons. The coordinated attempts to gain access to my financial accounts. The timeline they'd created together tracking my daily routines. The moment that destroyed both their defenses came on day 4, when the prosecution played jailhouse recordings of Ethan and Vanessa's conversations after their arrest. "If you hadn't switched the fucking cups." Ethan's voice, clear and damning in the silent courtroom. "If you hadn't been so obvious about wanting her money." Vanessa's reply: "She was supposed to drink the whole thing. You said the dosage was perfect." "It was perfect. For her weight. How was I supposed to know the stupid bitch would give it to my mother?" The jury's faces showed pure disgust. These weren't grieving family members caught up in tragic circumstances. These were cold-blooded killers angry that their victim had been too smart to die. When I took the stand, Walsh guided me through my testimony with careful precision. I told the story simply, without dramatic flourishes, letting the facts speak for themselves. The inheritance that had triggered their greed. The months of pressure and manipulation. The fake business proposals designed to steal my money. The moment I recognized the smell of cyanide and made the split-second decision that saved my life. "Mrs. Harlow," Walsh asked, "why did you decide to give your coffee to Patricia Morrison instead of drinking it yourself?" "Because I recognized the smell of cyanide from my hospital pharmacy training. I knew if I refused to drink it, Vanessa would realize I discovered her plan and might try again when I was more vulnerable. Giving the coffee to Patricia ensured there would be witnesses and immediate medical attention available." "Do you regret your decision to switch the coffee cups?" I looked directly at Vanessa as I answered, my voice steady and clear. "I regret that it came to that point. I regret that my son married someone capable of premeditated murder. I regret that my children valued money more than my life. But do I regret saving myself from being murdered by my own family?
No.
I don't regret that for 1 second. The defense cross-examination was brutal, but predictable. Vanessa's lawyer tried to paint me as a controlling, manipulative woman who deliberately isolated my children to maintain power over them. Mrs. Harlow, isn't it true that you've always resented your daughter-in-law's influence over your son?
No.
Isn't it true that you used your wealth to control your children's decisions throughout their adult lives?
No.
Isn't it true that you deliberately set up the scenario that led to Mrs. Morrison's poisoning?
No.
I protected myself from attempted murder using the only option available to me at the time. He hammered at me for 3 hours, trying to break my composure, trying to make me seem like the villain. But I'd spent months preparing for this moment, and I answered every question calmly and clearly. Finally, frustrated by my unshakable testimony, he made a critical error. Mrs. Harlow, if you really believed your daughter-in-law was trying to poison you, why didn't you simply call the police instead of playing dangerous games with coffee cups? I looked at him for a long moment, then turned to address the jury directly. Because I'm a 58-year-old widow who'd just lost her husband, and I believed my family loved me. Because when someone you've treated like a daughter hands you a cup of coffee, your first instinct isn't this person is trying to murder me. Because I hoped I was wrong. I paused, letting that sink in, but mostly because I needed proof. I needed evidence that would hold up in court, so that when I accused my son's wife of attempted murder, people would believe me instead of thinking I was a paranoid old woman. The lawyer had no response to that. He'd opened a door that allowed me to explain my actions in the most sympathetic possible terms while highlighting the defendant's betrayal of family trust. Ethan's cross-examination was even more damaging to the defense. His lawyer tried to portray him as a victim of gambling addiction, a man driven to desperation by forces beyond his control. But when they played recordings of his phone calls from jail, conversations where he showed no remorse for attempting to murder his mother, only anger at being caught, that narrative crumbled completely. I should have chosen a different target, he was heard telling another inmate. Someone without family complications. Not, I'm sorry I tried to kill my mother. Not, I regret my actions. Just cold calculation about how to commit murder more efficiently. The most dramatic courtroom moment came when the defense strategies finally turned Ethan and Vanessa against each other. Desperate to save herself, Vanessa's lawyer called Ethan as a hostile witness, attempting to pin the entire murder plot on him. Under oath, with his wife sitting 20 feet away, Ethan painted Vanessa as a manipulative sociopath who'd seduced him into conspiracy. He claimed she'd threatened to leave him if he didn't help her access my money. He testified that she'd been the one to research poisons, plan the details, calculate the lethal dosage. She told me it would look like a natural death, he said, his voice steady and cold. She said no one would ever suspect murder. Vanessa's face was a mask of pure hatred as she listened to her husband systematically destroy her defense to save himself. When her lawyer objected to the testimony, she leaned forward and whispered something that the court reporter couldn't catch, but I could read her lips clearly. Lying bastard. By the time closing arguments began, the only question wasn't guilt or innocence, it was how severe their punishment would be. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa, first-degree attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud. Sentence: life without possibility of parole. Ethan, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, fraud, elder abuse. Sentence: 35 years to life. As the verdicts were read, I watched my son and daughter-in-law receive their fates with different reactions. Vanessa collapsed in her chair, finally understanding that she would die in prison. Ethan remained standing, his jaw tight with the same stubborn defiance he'd shown as a child when caught in wrongdoing. As court officers prepared to lead them away in shackles, Vanessa turned to look at me one final time. Her mouth formed a single word: bitch. I smiled and mouthed back, "Survivor." But Ethan's last look was different. Not hatred or anger, calculation. Even facing decades in prison, he was already planning something. I could see it in his eyes, the same cold intelligence that had helped him plan my murder. That look told me this wasn't over. Prison wouldn't change what Ethan was. It would just give him time to plan his next move. But I was ready for whatever came next. Because I'd learned something important about myself during these months of betrayal and survival. I wasn't just smarter and stronger than my children had realized. When properly motivated, I could be absolutely ruthless. And they'd given me all the motivation I'd ever need. That night, I sat alone in my house with a glass of Robert's best wine, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My family was gone, not dead, but dead to me. The children I'd raised and loved had tried to murder me for money. But I was alive, I was free, and I had won. The war was over, but there was still one more battle to fight. One more child who'd betrayed me, who thought she could escape consequences because she hadn't directly participated in murder. Claire's about to learn that there are many ways to destroy someone's life without sending them to prison. And I was just getting started. Sometimes, revenge is best served in a coffee cup. 6 months after the trial, I was a completely different woman. The frightened widow who'd nearly been poisoned by her own family was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. I discovered reserves of cunning and ruthlessness I never knew existed within me. The inheritance had grown substantially during my transformation. Smart investments, guided by financial advisors I actually trusted, had turned Robert's $31 million into $43 million. Grief, I'd learned, was excellent motivation for mastering money management. Claire had tried desperately to maintain contact after the trial, sending increasingly frantic emails and voicemails that evolved from apologetic to demanding. She'd lost her job when the scandal broke. Apparently, having siblings convicted of attempted murder wasn't good for her career in the arts community. Her overpriced studio apartment had been repossessed, and she was couch surfing with friends who were growing tired of supporting her. "Mom, please," her last voicemail had pleaded. "I know I wasn't perfect, but I never tried to hurt you. I'm your daughter. Doesn't that count for anything?" It had counted for everything once. But Claire had shown her true character when she thought I was vulnerable. She'd been willing to steal from me through legal manipulation, to have me declared mentally incompetent, to drain my accounts systematically while leaving me to live in poverty. The only difference between her and her siblings was that she'd planned to let me live as a pauper instead of killing me outright. Small mercies. I deleted the voicemail without responding. The media attention had died down, but the story had made me something of a celebrity in certain circles. The widow who outsmarted her killers had been featured in true crime documentaries, women's magazines, and countless online forums. I'd turned down every interview request, but the attention had opened unexpected doors. Women contacted me constantly, widows facing pressure from greedy relatives, elderly people being financially abused by their own children, wives discovering their husbands' secret gambling addictions. They wanted advice, support, sometimes just someone who understood what it felt like to be betrayed by family. I found myself becoming an informal mentor, helping these women navigate legal systems, identify financial fraud, and most importantly, recognize their own strength. There was something deeply satisfying about transforming my trauma into power, not just for myself, but for others who needed protection. But my most personally satisfying project had been acquiring my children's former properties. I'd bought Ethan's house when it went into foreclosure, paying cash at well below market value. After having it completely renovated to erase every trace of his presence, I donated it to a women's shelter specializing in financial abuse recovery. The irony was perfect. The house where my son had planned my murder now protected women from exactly the kind of predators he'd become. Vanessa's upscale apartment received different treatment. I bought the entire building, then had her unit converted into a memorial library dedicated to elder abuse awareness. A bronze plaque in the lobby read, "In memory of all victims of family financial abuse, your trust was not misplaced, their betrayal was inexcusable." Today, however, I was sitting in a cafe in Florence, watching the sunset paint the Arno River in shades of gold and crimson. I'd spent the past month traveling through Italy, fulfilling dreams that Robert and I had shared but never found time to pursue. Every morning brought new beauty, new experiences, new reminders that life could be extraordinary when you stopped letting other people dictate your choices. I'd visited the Uffizi, the Vatican, the ruins of Pompeii. I'd eaten fresh pasta in tiny villages and drunk wine older than my grandchildren would have been. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Thought you'd want to know. Vanessa's appeal was denied. Final decision. Ethan's too. No more legal options." I smiled and typed back, "Excellent." They would spend the rest of their lives in prison, exactly as they deserved. When they eventually died, alone, forgotten, marked forever as the children who tried to murder their mother for money, I would not attend their funerals. But there was still one loose thread to tie up. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Claire. She'd been sending increasingly desperate messages, and it was time to provide the closure she'd been demanding. "Claire," I wrote, "I received your messages about needing help, about family loyalty, about forgiveness. I want you to understand something that should have been obvious months ago. The moment you conspired with Derek Pemberton to steal my money, you stopped being my daughter. The moment you plotted to have me declared mentally incompetent, you became a stranger wearing my child's face. Your siblings are in prison because they tried to murder me. You're not in prison only because you preferred theft to homicide. Consider that the only mercy you'll ever receive from me. I will live another 30 years, God willing. I will spend every day of those years ensuring my wealth supports people who understand that money comes with responsibility, not entitlement. You will never see a penny of what your father left me. When I die, everything will go to organizations that protect women and children from predators like you became. If you want to rebuild your life, do it with your own hands and your own work, the way decent people do. The way your father did before he became successful enough to attract parasites like his own children. Do not contact me again. You are dead to me, as I was apparently dead to you when you thought you could profit from my vulnerability. Marvy Harlow." I sent the email immediately, then blocked her address permanently. The final connection to my former life was severed. Outside the cafe window, Florence sparkled in the gathering dusk like a jewel box. Tomorrow I would take a cooking class, then visit a vineyard in Tuscany. Next week I'd fly to Greece, then perhaps Morocco, then wherever my heart desired. I was 59 years old, worth $43 million and growing, and completely free. Free from family obligations, from people who saw me as a resource to be exploited, from the exhausting work of loving people who'd never truly loved me back. My children had tried to destroy me for my money, and instead had given me the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge of who I really was when stripped of illusions about family loyalty. I was a survivor. I was a fighter. I was a woman who would never again apologize for protecting herself or her assets. The waiter brought my check, 43 euros for dinner, and wine that had been absolutely perfect. I paid with my platinum credit card, the one with no spending limit, a privilege of wealth that I'd learned to use without guilt. As I walked back to my 5-star hotel through Florence's ancient streets, I thought about Robert. Would he approve of the woman I'd become? The wife who'd systematically destroyed their own children to protect herself? I thought he would. Robert had always admired strength, had always respected people who fought for what was theirs. He'd left me his fortune because he'd trusted my judgment, and my judgment had been proven absolutely correct. Our children were exactly as dangerous and selfish as he'd feared. In my hotel suite, I poured myself a glass of Brunello di Montalcino and opened my laptop. Tomorrow, I would transfer another $1 million to organizations supporting elder abuse victims. Next month, I would establish a foundation providing legal aid to women being financially exploited by family members. I would spend my remaining years ensuring that Robert's money protected people like me from people like our children had become. But first, I had one small indulgence to enjoy. I opened a new browser tab and searched for recent news about the state prison where Ethan and Vanessa were serving their sentences. A small item caught my eye. Inmate violence increases at Millfield Correctional Facility. I smiled and took another sip of wine. Prison, I'd learned, was particularly unforgiving to people convicted of trying to murder elderly relatives. My children were discovering that there were predators in every environment, and now they were the prey. The wine was excellent. The view was spectacular. The future was entirely mine. And somewhere in separate cells thousands of miles away, the children who'd tried to poison me were learning that some people are much more dangerous than they appear. I raised my glass to the Florence skyline and whispered, to Robert, who protected me even in death, and to the woman I became when I stopped being afraid of my own power. Revenge, it turned out, was a dish best served at the perfect temperature, not cold, but precisely calibrated to destroy everything it touched while leaving the server completely satisfied. I took another sip and began planning tomorrow's adventures. Life, I discovered, was absolutely delicious when you stopped letting other people poison it. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey of betrayal, survival, and ultimate justice. If Marvy's story moved you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments which moment impacted you most. Stories like this remind us that we're stronger than we think, smarter than others assume, and capable of protecting ourselves even when our own family becomes the enemy. This is Her True Stories, where we share tales of women who refuse to be victims. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story of strength, survival, and sometimes perfectly calculated justice. Remember, you are more powerful than you know, and you deserve to be treated with respect and love. Never let anyone, family or otherwise, convince you that you're worth less than the protection and dignity you deserve. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and never underestimate the power of a woman who's done being underestimated.